Well, if your name just happens to be Ed Miliband, then I can see you joining the job centre queue very, very soon. And that is because Labour has appeared to admit, if anything, that he is wrong. But just what is going on then? Well, apparently the government has just cut down on its predictions for how much electricity wind farms actually churn out, which is, of course, a bit of setback for Ed Miliband's net zero wet dreams, isn't it? And get this, apparently this happened just before a big auction for green energy subsidies this week. And officials revealed that they're dialing back the expected efficiency on wind turbines by over a quarter, which obviously is a big amount, isn't it? I mean, I'm pretty sure we'd all agree that if our bills shot up by a quarter, that would be a massive amount. Hopefully, if and when reform get in, they might finally start to fall. Although let's face it, with Ed Miliband and net zero going on the way things are, they're only going to climb up, surely, eh? Although admittedly, I could be wrong. But apparently this is all because of, wait for this, updated modelling. Well, perhaps they should have got it right to begin with. And experts are saying that this tweak means that Energy Secretary will have to shell out more in subsidies to wind farms to get the same amount of energy, making a tougher nut to crack for Labour's clean power goals, as I'm sure they see it as. The Conservatives, well, hearing this news, they ain't exactly holding back either, calling the bogus numbers out and urging Mr. Miliband to ditch the latest subsidy auction, warning it could hike up consumer bills, which obviously in the middle of a cost of living crisis is the last thing we all want, isn't it? Hey, but apparently, industry insiders have been warning officials that the power generation estimates were a bit, shall we say, pie in the sky, but the government stuck to them anyway, which obviously, in my opinion, if anything, is kind of pulling the wool over our eyes, isn't it? Which, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Keir Starmer doesn't have a problem with. And one developer, though, even said that the numbers were statistically absurd. And on top of that, Spanish giant Ula, if I pronounced that right, which owns Scottish Power, mentioned a 5% drop in our wind farm generation due to, wait for this, lower wind resource. Well, whilst I'm sure quite a lot of us can generate a bit of wind every now and then, unfortunately, even that more than likely will not meet the government's statistics or promise or whatever you want to call it of the thing to start off with, I'm sure, even if it was added to it, eh? But there are loads of things, apparently, that can actually mess with turbine efficiency, like wind speed, wind theft from nearby farms. I don't know how that really works, but I'm guessing it must do. And how often they actually have to switch off to avoid overloading the network. And wind speeds have been on the decline across the UK and apparently Europe for ages, which apparently is a thing called stilling. But a recent study from Cardiff University actually found out that somehow wind speeds are picking up again, but even that, I'm sure, won't meet the government's statistics or promise. And therefore, as such, the government's new estimates have actually slashed the predicted load factor, which, is basically how much of the year turbines are expected to be generating power, from 61% to, wait for this, 43, which obviously is a bit of a drop, isn't it? Especially during winter, I'm guessing. And that is for offshore wind. Onshore turbines, though, they have got a similar haircut from 48.7% to 33.4%. And this change is down to new modelling that shows turbines aren't as powerful as what they thought, and then updated ideas on what can actually cause them to lose power. But what did they all say about it then? Well, apparently a spokesman for the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, or DESNES, or whatever you want to call it, the acronym, didn't really explain why the government made such a drastic cut to its estimates. Claire Clitheroe, the Shadow Home Secretary, and Mr. Miliband's predecessor chimed in saying, "My time in department convinced me that the government is relying on bogus numbers that make net zero look artificially cheap. I started a full system cost analysis to reveal the true cost of an energy system dependent on wind and solar. But Ed Miliband has scrapped it because he doesn't want to know the truth. He tells you all you need to know bad data leads to bad policy. And that surely is a very good point. And it just makes you think, doesn't it? If Ed Miliband had access to all this data to begin with, but presumably saw the figures and thought, oh, I can't let them know about that, and carried on with it anyway, just makes you wonder, doesn't it? Just what else could he not be telling us that we really do actually need to know? And this downgrade is casting a shadow, remember, over Ed Miliband's clean power targets. Labour is apparently aiming for 95% clean power sources, that is, by 2030, which means tripling the current offshore wind capacity alone. And now I'm guessing since these new estimates have come in, they'll more than likely have to be more than tripled, surely. And even though these less efficient turbines actually cost the same to build, the subsidy needed to make these projects work obviously goes up, doesn't it? Because they're not generating enough wind, presumably. And industry experts reckon that the latest round of subsidies isn't even generous enough to hit the Energy Secretary's goals, which obviously is surely going to be a massive kick in his balls, and one which he, or actually the Labour government, or both, have kind of admitted here. And Mr. Miliband still needs to secure at least another 12 gigawatts of capacity, but Renewable UK, which represents wind farm owners, said he only budgeted for 5 gigawatts in the latest auction, which apparently is a big deal, because this year's auction, known as Allocation Round 7 or AR7, is one of the last chances to snag enough power for his target, which obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing he's going to miss. And an even more of a kick in his balls, Catherine Porter, an independent energy consultant, pointed out that the government's load factor revisions can't change budget reality, and it will mean that Mr. Miliband will be able to buy less capacity than last year. And she added, you can't assume a higher load factors in a spreadsheet, but that doesn't reduce the actual capital outlay or construction costs per gigawatt. And the likely practical outcome is that this year's £900 million budget, which I personally actually think could be spent on much better things, but that aside, that will apparently underwrite fewer gigawatts than before, Miss Porter said. But a DESNZ spokesperson, well, what did they say? They reckon that the revision doesn't necessarily mean higher subsidies will be needed, though, as the money only gets paid out if wholesale power prices in the future drop below a certain level. But the government did admit that the reduced load factors influence the maximum budget ministers were willing to set for offshore wind power support. And even further to that, Nick Hibbard from Renewable UK mentioned that the previous auctioned load factor assumptions were actually really high compared to what we can realistically expect from offshore wind generation in the coming years. And Renewable UK also noted, apparently, that the current actual load factor for offshore turbines is actually about 38%, which has been improving over time thanks to better technology and bigger, more efficient turbines. But of course, surely that is no way near where they need to be. And if anything, and admittedly I hope I'm wrong, but I can see our bills going up and up and up as a result, eh?